This looks like fun, but these toys are actually simple machines that can work as well as play. If you were to take this bike apart, you'd find it's made up of a bunch of simple machines. There are levers in the shifter, pulleys that make the brakes work, wedges in the gear teeth, and of course, the most obvious, a wheel and axle. All these simple machines have their roots in the ancient world.
The 6 simple machines were developed in ancient times, in the Greeks and Egyptians, and kind of almost in prehistory they were known about. It's commonly thought that Stonehenge was built with a combination of simple machines, so they've been around for a very long time. One of the most basic simple machines is a lever, and everybody's seen a teeter-totter, and that's basically a lever at work. What you need is a long arm and a fulcrum that balances and allows you to swing back and forth. And by changing the length of the lever arm, one can change and get mechanical advantage. And mechanical advantage means that I can exert a small force and move a large object. Everybody is familiar with a wheel and axle from their own car, but it's actually a very ancient machine. And I want you to think about a well. And typically in a well, there is a small rod that's tied to a bigger wheel outside. And around the smaller axle is a rope that's tied to a bucket. And so one cranks the larger wheel on the outside, you gain mechanical advantage in lifting that bucket of water. These were commonly used to lift stones up to construct castles and to get stones up to high heights. The typical pulley system will have one end of a rope anchored at a roofline, and then it'll loop through and then tie to the weight. And when you pull on the one end of the rope, part of the weight that you're pulling on is being supported by the roof and the support up above. And so you gain mechanical advantage based on the number of pulleys that are there. So you can, again, amplify your strength in lifting an object. So an inclined plane is just a ramp. We're all very familiar with that. And of course, the advantage of a ramp is that as you move an object up it, you gain because you don't have to support the entire weight. So we all like to lift things and push them up ramps rather than, grunt carry them up a hill. The most common example of a wedge is an axe. So think of a sharpened blade that allows you, when you hit something with it, to split in an easier fashion. So a screw is the most interesting, I think, of the 6 common machines, because the screw is used to translate linear motion into circular motion or vice versa.
Simple machines helped ancient people harness the power of the natural world with less work. One example where we see this principle in action is the water wheel.
In Roman times, the 2 main sources of power were animals and humans, and they were not necessarily looking for alternative sources of power. In medieval Europe, water power proliferates for 2 reasons. Number 1, they don't have a ready supply of human beings to do the work of a water wheel. Number 2, there's a lot of fast-running streams. The topography is well suited, especially in Northern Europe. A lot of water, a lot of fast-running streams, etc. So you put the 2 together and you have the perfect power source.
So there are 2 classic examples of water wheels in the Middle Ages. The first is an undershot wheel. So think of just dropping a wheel into a stream and using the current of the stream itself to turn the wheel in the opposite directions. The power gain from that is fairly limited because you're limited by the strength of the current that's flowing.
Where you have mountainous topography and you have mountain streams, or you have something coming down a hill, you can, in fact, use the overshoot water wheel, which is going to turn it even more.
And here, typically, they'd be associated with a dam. So I have the water up here, and I would build a sluice gate that would allow the water to run, and it would enter on the top of the wheel. And then not only do I have the velocity of the water turning the wheel, but actually I capture some of that water in the wheel, and so the weight of the water itself turns the wheel, and then the water is released when the wheel gets to the bottom and they come back up empty. So the primary usage was to mill grain.
So you start to see the emergence of the miller in the town. And the farmers figure that it is much more economical just to bring their grain to the miller, rather than every little farm having its own mill for grinding grain. So you start to see the emergence of the miller as a capital center. We've come all the way to the town. Somebody says, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to serve beer. So you create a tavern. You're going to need somewhere to stay overnight. So you create the inn. And then when you're at the inn, well, maybe some bards are going to show up and sing some songs. And there's obviously going to be a church, because the next morning you're going to want to go to church.
Somewhere along the line, someone invented the cam system, which allows you to convert rotational motion into an up and down motion. And so that up and down motion then could be used for different kinds of applications. You could pound, say, mill paper using that motion. You could saw wood using that motion. So eventually the water wheel found applications in lots of other areas as well.
At the same time, in Spain and in Northern Europe, they were looking at harnessing the power of a different resource.
We have to imagine windmills, wind turbines, whatever we call them, probably extending back into antiquity. They become a force that begins to change Europe and medieval society in the High Middle Ages. They do what water mills do. They have the advantage of being able to do what water mills do in winter when streams and rivers are frozen. Basically grind grain for the purpose of bread making, food making, etc. And they serve as pumps also for example, clearing areas that are underwater. That water can be pumped to different locations. You will tend to see the windmills being placed where the wind is steadier, and that to the present day continues. Wind power is making a comeback, so you have wind gardens now with these immense wind turbines, typically in areas where the wind is pretty constant, and I think that's always been a consideration.
And even as we start to see modern wind farms pop up across the world, we still rely on water to produce power.
The modern application of a water wheel is hydroelectric power. So in a modern dam, water is stored energy. It's at a very high height. They let it come down the dam, and then that powers a wheel effectively in the bottom, although it's more efficient to use a turbine like you would find in a jet. And that creates a rotational energy that is then converted into electricity. The Hoover Dam generates electric power, Niagara Falls generates electric power. So almost any dam is also used to generate electricity because it's kind of a free energy source. If I'm going to store the energy of the water behind the dam, then why not let it generate electricity as it comes out the bottom?
And now researchers are adding new meaning to the term catch a wave.
One of the main thrusts of Sandia is to work on energy and energy security. And so part of that is a large renewable energies division, and I work particularly within the water power technologies division. So we work on marine hydrokinetic devices that will renewably produce power for our nation's grid. As water flows either unidirectionally in a river or bidirectionally in tides or even circularly under waves, we're able to capture that kinetic energy and produce useful energy in the form of electricity. Marine hydrokinetics is a great example, direct example of Newton's second law, in which the work performed from water on the device, it changes the kinetic energy of the device, which is what we then convert into useful energy. What's important in ocean waves is in the way that we interact with them from a kinetic sense, or the wave energy converter devices interact with them, is that the water particle velocity underneath the wave is actually circular. And it is that profile that allows devices to absorb energy in many different degrees of freedom. And you can see that as the waves approach the shore, this circular profile changes and it elongates into more of an ellipse. The waves that are in the Pacific Northwest are different than the waves that are out by Ireland or down in Australia. What I mean by that specifically is that they have different energy content. So you'll choose to design a device to these different energy contents. A good wave absorber is a good wave maker. So you know when you throw like a pebble in a pond, you can kind of see round radiating waves come out. Well, all devices that we create to harvest energy will create some pattern of radiated waves. And it is this concept that allows us to absorb wave energy. This is a two-body point absorber device. This device floats in the open ocean. And so the waves, you can imagine them coming and swinging by like this, and this float moving up and down. Now, the spar will move a little bit too, but the key is that you're getting this relative motion between the float and the spar, and that's how you're actually capturing energy in the ocean. Inside, in this particular case, inside of the spar is what is called a power takeoff unit. And the power takeoff unit is comprised of some kind of drivetrain, which could be a hydraulic cylinders or a rack and pinion or a ball screw. And then that drivetrain is connected to an electrical generator. What we're looking at here is an oscillating water column device. This actually utilizes two principles of wave energy conversion. One of them is the wave activated body, which is the clear unit that you see here. And the other is the oscillating water column, which is inside of this unit. And what we see in this video are some of the measurements that are needed to understand how the device is operating. Currently, there are a few devices that are actually sending electrons to the grid, but they're not doing so at a utility scale farm. So in some senses, it is a similar concept to how water wheels traditionally worked, but it's just moved forward, I suppose, in technological agility. The term marine hydrokinetics, it opens you up to any kinetic motion in water. Waterfalls, flowing currents in rivers, open ocean currents like the Gulf Stream, tidal movements back and forth, all of those things. When you have kinetic movement of water, you can design a device to harness that energy.
And so, much like the machines that allowed ancient people to capture the power of nature, today scientists are trying to catch the next wave in hopes it will lead to new ways of harnessing the Earth's vast energy potential.